So there are some instruments that are crazy valuable just because they are what they are. And then there are those instruments that are the reason that's even a thing, the reason that's even desirable. Today, this episode is about the latter. What is up, old souls? This is Reed from Everyman Vintage, and thanks for tuning into Storied Sounds, where we take a look at vintage instruments through the lens of the stories they bear, not so much the price tag that they carry. Now, to be 100% honest today, and in the sake of full disclosure, I would like to let you know that this one carries a pretty hefty price tag, around six figures, actually a little north of that. However, that is not at the expense of a great story. And so let's jump right in today and talk about this beautiful April 25th Lloyd Loar signed Gibson F-5 mandolin. Now that is a mouthful, so let's talk a little bit about what that is. First off, that is the right instrument at the wrong time. And what I mean by that is, think of things like the Gibson Explorer, the Gibson Flying V, or even the venerable bursts of the late 50s into very, very, very early 60s. They were way ahead of their time. All right, they were expensive, they were awesome instruments, but commercially they were not successful, which meant the numbers were not there, they didn't produce a lot of them, and when they became popular years later, that caused the mystique and the price to skyrocket. And so that same thing happened to the Lloyd Loar era instrument, specifically the mandolin, after Bill Monroe got a hold of one in 1945 and made musical history by inventing bluegrass with that mandolin. And so with that being said, let's talk about exactly what brought us to that point. So in the early 1900s, mandolins were very popular, and mandolin orchestras were as well. Now, there was lots of music being written at that time, lots of mandolin orchestras traveling around, and when you think of a violin, a mandolin occupies that same space. So in the same way that there's a violin, a viola, a cello, and a bass, you have a mandolin, a mandola, mandocello, and even a mando bass. And at times, these mandolin orchestras would travel around with guitars or harp guitars or things like that to accompany them, and it was a really popular thing. Now, this dude by the name of Lloyd Loar was one of these musicians, and by the time he landed at Gibson as their their acoustic engineer, they called him, mandolin music was on the way out. But that didn't stop Lloyd Loar from making some pretty significant changes to Gibson's F-style and A-style mandolins, for that matter. So he created this new thing called the F-5. Previously, the F-4 had an oval hole, a shorter scale. The fingerboard wasn't elevated, all of these types of things. And when Lloyd Loar comes around, he changes all of that. So he's using an Adirondack spruce top, he's using maple back and sides, as well as neck. You're talking an ebony overlay on the headstock and an ebony fingerboard. He elevated that fingerboard up over the body where it joins. He lengthened the scale on the instrument, which put the bridge a little bit more towards the center of the instrument, which has a massive impact on it tonally. He also wanted a little bit more of a focused sound, so he removed the oval-sized sound hole, and he incorporated F-holes like you would see on a violin. He also hand-tuned each top with two tone bars on the inside for bracing, and the rest is history. So think Stradivarius. In the same way that that particular type of violin became the pattern, the standard by which all others are measured, that is exactly what happened to Lloyd Loar in the F-5 mandolin. It is one of the most beautiful designs. It is gorgeous. The scroll is just beautifully carved. The scroll on the headstock, just the shape, the proportions, the finish, everything about it, they're just so elegant and beautiful. And so all these changes were made at a time when mandolins were not nearly as in high of demand, and so all of these changes also increased the price of the mandolin. So when this one was made in 1923, it would have cost you $250. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, at the same time, Martin's top of the line guitar, the most expensive guitar they made, was $150. And so originally the F-5 was $200. By 1923, that price had gone up to $250. They were expensive. They weren't as popular. Therefore, they made about 300 or so of them. We don't have exact numbers because, well, we all know how Gibson was with their records, but, you know, somewhere north of 300 of them, not a lot. I think somewhere around 270 are known to exist, which means there could be some more of these floating around somewhere, or some were just simply lost to history. But needless to say, this instrument is extremely rare. Now, in the early 1940s, Bill Monroe was already a successful musician, although the things we know as bluegrass had not quite been invented. All the pieces had not yet come together. Monroe, I believe in 1945, was at a barber shop in Florida and saw this mandolin in the window, and it was being sold used, and he bought it. It was a 1923 F-5 like this one. It was signed a little later to July 9 Loar mandolin, and so he bought that. Ended up going on later and creating bluegrass with that, and it just became so synonymous with that sound that the demand for it went way up, which means that the price did so as well. Now, it hasn't always been that terribly high, but once people got interested in vintage instruments and all of these types of things, the Loar was a natural choice to be something that was extremely expensive. Now, as far as this one goes, as I mentioned before, it's an April 25th Lloyd Loar 1923. It does not have a Verzi tone producer. Some people call them tone reducers. They're really kind of this cool thing that Lloyd Loar invented. It's like a little spruce disc that is suspended on the inside from the top. Definitely has a different sound, changes the way it sounds when you play it, gives it a different nuance, and it definitely fit really well within the context of a mandolin orchestra. But when it comes time to, you know, go to battle against a 5-string banjo, that the Verzis typically aren't terribly desirable as far as we're concerned in bluegrass. This one does not have it, and so it is a super cool instrument. It was purchased used by a guy by the name of H.C. Keppel, who was the leader of a mandolin orchestra. I'll put up on the video here some original paperwork, like a brochure or pamphlet from that time period. You can see Keppel in the middle with an F4 style mandolin, but he was the leader of this mandolin orchestra out of New Haven, Connecticut. Purchased this one when it was a few years old and played it until his death in 1935. The mandolin then went to his son, and it sat under a bed until 1984, where it was taken to the String Emporium in Massachusetts, and it was later sold. Changed hands a few times. A good friend of mine bought it in 2001 from a guy who played in the Austin Lounge Lizards and I believe Pam Tillis's band. He's had it ever since then, and a few things have been done to it. Not a whole lot. This is a very, very clean and a very, very complete example. I believe it's had the first 5 frets changed out with, of course, period correct or basically new old stock fret wire. It is, at one point it was being played on stage, and it was dropped, and just like had happened to Bill Monroe's mandolin, at one point the scroll on the headstock was busted off. That has been expertly repaired as well. But apart from that, this thing, as well as its killer original case, which in and of itself is an absolute work of art and completely beautiful, they're in just phenomenal shape. The sunburst on this thing, it's got a varnish finish, which is extremely durable, extremely beautiful. The sunburst is gorgeous. The back and sides have just awesome figure. Lots of Loars have pretty understated backs. This one's got a pretty beautiful flame to it. Hopefully you can see some of that in the video as well. It's got the original Waverly tuners that just work amazingly. I didn't even really tune the mandolin when I did the demo for this video because it didn't really need it. They just hold really well, and it's a pretty amazing instrument. All around, super thankful to my friend who let me just walk out of his house with, you know, a mandolin that costs as much as my house does. So that's a pretty impressive thing, and I was super thankful for doing that, him letting me do that. Now, a really cool thing about it is that the Adirondack spruce top, if it doesn't get played a lot, has a way of falling asleep. And the mandolin sounded great when I went to pick it up, but after I brought it home, I had been playing it for a while, getting to know it a little bit, kind of learning as a musician does how to pull the best tone out of it. Man, did that thing ever wake up and come to life, and it is an absolutely astoundingly cool instrument. And so I'm going to demo it for you here, and I'll just kind of try to take it through its paces. I'll do some tremolo kind of work, which you have to do on the mandolin since it doesn't sustain so much. If you want those notes to continue on for a period of time, you have to tremolo it. So I'll do some of that, some chopping so you can hear that rhythmic sound, and then I'll just play something melodic. I'll do a tune that I wrote called Huckleberry's Hope that's on the latest Audie Blaylock and Redline record entitled Originalist. It's not me playing mandolin on that particular cut. We had the legendary Ronnie McCoury come in and absolutely slay that one, but I'll play it for you on this Loar, so hopefully you get the chance to see everything that this instrument has to offer and how it just an absolutely incredible piece of musical history. Well, there you have it, old souls. And April 25th, Lloyd Loar signed Gibson F-5 mandolin in all of its sonic glory. So just something else that kind of came to my mind I want to share with you, and I think we should really take some time and address on this channel is, I don't want to talk about prices and things like that, but a lot of people often say, man, something that's worth that much money, is it really worth it? Is it really different than a newer instrument that's really high quality? And you can figure out for you what makes the most sense as far as value goes to something, but what I will tell you is there is a difference, and we're not talking about sitting here and doing like some blind A-B thing, playing the same lick from one mandolin to the other, because that's not making music and that's not the way you experience music. And so as a musician, here's what I will tell you when you play an instrument like this. Again, not all Loars are created equal. Just because it's a 59 burst doesn't mean it's going to be amazing, but what I will say is this: when you're dealing with a vintage instrument of this caliber, that really is the reason why it's a thing. It does something to you as a player, and the experience as a player is entirely different. I've played tons of really great mandolins, new ones that cost $20,000 by, the most prestigious builders in the world, and they really are amazing instruments, and I'm not downplaying that at all. This particular mandolin is the best mandolin that I've ever played. Not only is it just an absolute work of art that is created by hand, but is still somehow just perfect everywhere you look at it. Not only does it have that aspect going for it, but sonically, there's nothing it can't do. I can sit there and play a really low and powerful E kind of chord, get that real fat, chunky, punchy, powerful chop, and then I can go all the way up the neck and play a high E bar chord, and it literally loses nothing. You can't overdrive it, you can't bottom it out, it never farts out on you. It is just strong and powerful wherever you go. But then it has the other end of the spectrum too. It's so delicate and nuanced and beautiful and bell-like. All at the same time, I can play little delicate tremolo passages, and it just has so much texture and depth to the tone. And then you can just give it a little flair on the end, or a little flourish on the end of your tremolo, the last couple strokes, with just a little bit more force, and it has this way of just kind of, the notes just blossom and they like take off like some bird taking flight. It's just this crazy thing that as a player, it removes all obstacles from you. It's like the most direct line from what you're thinking and feeling to the listener's ears. Like every great instrument, even a lot of the really great instruments that I have or play from other people, there are obstacles in the way. There are hurdles you have to get over to get what you want out there. And when you have an instrument like this that really doesn't have any weak spots, all of that is removed, and it's the most pure expression of you as a musician. And so to me, when we analyze these types of things and we look at vintage instruments and say, is there really a difference? You can't just look at it from the perspective of what's coming through your speakers on a YouTube video. You have to actually play it from one instrument to the next to understand that as a player, I can do things and go places, and I'm freed up to play in a way that I wouldn't otherwise be able to play. And so anyway, that's kind of my soapbox for the day. But man, it was reminded by this particular instrument how an instrument can make you a better player. Now, with that being said, a great player doesn't need an instrument like this to sound great or to sound like them. But when all the stars align and all the pieces come together, it really is a magical thing. And so I'm genuinely thankful to my friend who let me borrow this mandolin. It is an incredible instrument, and I believe you've got one of the best ones that exists. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about Loar mandolins if you'd never seen one before, or if you knew a lot about them, correct me in the comments. It's completely fine. I don't claim to be an expert on these things. I just have an interest in them, and Lloyd Loar mandolins and things that are that valuable have people who have devoted their entire life to understanding them more deeply, and I just am not one of those people. I do love them though, and so I hope you enjoyed the opportunity to learn a bit about them, hear a little bit of it, and hopefully you can catch a little bit about what I'm saying about the experience that you have as a player playing such an awesome vintage instrument like this. So make sure you like this video, please share this video, and subscribe to it. Make sure you hit the bell button so you're getting notifications when I release a new video. But thanks so much for listening and watching Storied Sounds. I'm Reed from Everyman Vintage. We'll see you next time.